What can I do?
Nobody asked. Nobody asked. Nobody asked. Wait, so 10 seconds.
So long.
Nobody asked. Nobody asked. Nobody asked. Oh,
Hello, and welcome one and all to an episode of Nobody Asked with Maria.
well, hello.
She's in high definition now, and Colin. And with special guest, it's my uncle and my mother's brother. That's how it works. It's Uncle Vinny.
That's me.
Hey.
Oh, hey,
Nobody
oh,
asked.
hey.
All right. Today, we have a couple of topics. They're related to each other, and we'll have a nice, beautiful segue as we always do. That feels completely natural, and you guys basically don't even notice that there's a segue. It's just perfect. Today we'll be talking about the West Memphis 3, the case there, and then just in order to dispel any illusions that we're becoming a true crime podcast, we are going to then move into the Satanic Panic, the concept of moral panic, etc. And so that's what we'll be doing today. Woo!
Okay.
Yeah. Oh my God, it's so good. All right.
I'm echoing for somebody. Somebody turn their volume down on their speakers. I can hear myself coming through.
It can't be done. Let me see if I can turn on my
Hello.
echo cancellation.
Hold on.
Echo cancellation's
Is
on
it me?
for me. It's on for
no.
Uncle Vinny. And it's
You're stuck, can't you? Yeah.
done for
I think
everyone.
it fixed
Oh, well.
it. I think it's fixed.
let's
There we go. We're good.
All right.
All right. Okay.
Fixed.
Without further ado, Mother, would you like to introduce the topic?
Sure, I'll introduce the topic that you already introduced.
Just
How I would like to
kidding.
start this is by
We will never stop this joke.
Nope.
All right. Today, we have another advertiser today, and that advertiser is Feeman Gare Associates. So they've sent me some copy to read here. Today's episode of Nobody Asked is sponsored by Feeman Gare Associates, Movement Naming Partners, a proud associate of Satanism. Do you have a political movement or ideology whose existence is in large part a reaction to some sort of enemy movement? Do you fear that without that enemy, your movement will lose steam and simply become an element of the cultural zeitgeist from which you can no longer derive profit and power? At Feeman Gare Associates, we can ensure that never happens with the assistance of our movement naming partners. Our strategy rests upon a simple premise. In order to keep an ideology in the sweet spot of relevance without gaining too much acceptance and simply becoming common opinion, you must prevent the conversion of your enemies into supporters. However, you also need the people who likely already empathize with your movement to become so ingrained in that movement that they themselves will stoke division between themselves and outsiders. In order to accomplish this, we utilize an innovative naming process that ensures outsiders of your movement will never actually read into the larger, more nuanced and logical platform that your movement rests upon, thereby preventing reasonable conversation from ever taking place between insiders and outsiders. We'll take a single grain of truth from your platform, likely the most controversial, and we'll blow it up in a way that is specifically designed to alienate people who are unlikely to have been exposed to the platform already. Despite the fact our name will fly directly in the face of your movement's goals, you'll find that insiders no longer take the name as the actual words it consists of, but as a simple symbol for the ideology itself. Meanwhile, outsiders will take the name at face value and internalize the movement itself as the name. Don't take our word for it. Listen to the testimonials of some of our partners that you may have heard of. Like, we're so glad we got them on. Feminism. When Feeman Gare Associates first came up with the name feminism, I wasn't so sure. After all, the movement was about gender equality, and despite the fact that women had more ground to cover, highlighting one gender in particular in the name seemed counterproductive. However, as soon as we debuted the name, Republicans interpreted that we were a female supremacy group, which only made our existing members more mad and made them buy more t-shirts. We might be producing progress more slowly, and Roe v. Wade might have been overturned more than 50 years after the precedent was established, but at least we insulated ourselves from the outside world, like the Yankees. And our partners at Defund the Police. Hey, I'll admit I was cynical at first. I said, sure, defund literally means to withdraw funding from, which could be interpreted as decreasing funding. But aren't people going to hear this and think we're arguing for no police force at all? That's what I said. But I was completely missing the point. Every Republican on earth basically conflated our movement with abolishing the police, which made our supporters even more riled up and buy more flags, even though they were the ones who were acting all high and mighty about Trump flags being imbecilic. We have so much money now. And and we have many, many more testimonials on our webpage from the likes of Black Lives Matter, Satanism, and the term Democratic Republic, which has been successfully ending reasonable discourse about the U.S. and its systems for almost 250 years. Come to Feeman Guerra Associates for your movement naming needs.
Holy cheese balls.
That was our ad for the day.
That was a lot to digest. Holy moly. Are you in a tent? Inquired minds want to know.
Am I in a tent? No, I'm in a state of flux in my apartment, and I'm covering that flux up with a sheet because we had a bunch of stuff stored under our bed, and we deconstructed our bed, and then that stuff was still there. So we piled it up behind me, and then we draped a sheet over it.
But it does sort of look like you're in a tent, or, as Ashley would like to point out, a chanting space.
A chanting space. Well, how incredibly relevant to the West Memphis 3. Perfect segue. I guess there's no tents involved. I guess chanting was the through line.
Yes.
All right.
She's ready. We
are ready. So I don't know if we want to hop back and forth, but first I'm just going to cover what the crime for which the West Memphis 3 were prosecuted was, and then we'll get into the 3. We're going to cover all these bases, and then we're going to use it as a lens through which to look at the Satanic Panic, how it happens, how it takes a hold of people, etc. So,
that wasn't the one I was looking for. My bad. Carry on.
What? Carry on. All right. On May 5th, 1993, 3 8-year-old boys by the name of Steve Branch, Michael Moore, and Christopher Byers were reported missing in West Memphis, Arkansas. The first report to the police was made by Christopher Byers' father, John Mark Byers, around 7 p.m. Around 1:45 p.m. the next day, juvenile parole officer Steve Jones spotted a boy's black shoe floating in a muddy creek that led to a major drainage canal in the Robin Hood Hills. A subsequent search of the ditch revealed the bodies of those 3 boys. They had been stripped naked and were hogtied with their own shoelaces. Their clothing was found in the creek, some of it twisted around sticks that had been thrust into the muddy ditch bed. The clothing was mostly turned inside out. 2 of the boys' underwear was never recovered. Christopher Byers had lacerations to various parts of his body and mutilation of his scrotum and penis. Police initially suspected the boys had been raped. However, later expert testimony disputed the finding. Trace amounts of sperm DNA were found on a pair of pants recovered from the scene. Prosecution experts claimed Byers' wounds were the results of a knife attack and that he had been purposely castrated by the murderer. Defense experts claimed the injuries were most likely the result of post-mortem animal predation. Police believe the boys were assaulted and killed at the location where they were found. Critics argued that the assault, at least, was unlikely to have occurred at the creek because no blood was recovered at the scene. This is the crime.
This is the crime.
And then we can play music over it.
Yeah, that is the most condensed version of the crime. That is what happened. Bodies were found. Well, boys went missing. They had been riding on their bikes. They had been seen in the neighborhood together by lots of people. It was very normal back in this is the 90s, but the 80s and 90s, you would just let your kids run the streets together. All the neighbors would know each other. It wasn't a big deal. That this was just normal. There is some. I think I've heard one witness account where they say that. Who is it? Terry Hobbs, which is Stevie Branch's stepdad, that he maybe called them into the house at one point. You know, when they were out, you know, around 6 or 6:30. That was the last time the kids were seen, was around 6 or 6:30. That he called them into the house. That somebody said they would. Yeah, but
all right.
You know, who knows? There's so much conflicting information out there about what people saw and when they saw it, and motivations people might have to tell, to give him misinformation. And there was lots of misinformation. You know, right down even to the crime scene itself. There was a lot of, man, we just saw something. This looks crazy, and I'm going to admit that does look crazy. That scene sounds absolutely horrifying.
It sounds quite disturbing.
Yeah, and I think it would be natural for you to jump to terrible conclusions because it's a terrible scene. And what they jumped to, go ahead.
Well, and from the very jump, they did say the same thing. So police officers James Sudbury and Steve Jones, who were among the first to appear at the scene, there they are behind me, who were among the first to show up at the scene, immediately felt that the crime had, quote, cult overtones. And another person who had arrived at the scene, I believe it was that juvenile parole officer, even said, well, it looks like Damien Eccles finally killed. So the second that this crime scene was found and it had these cultish overtones, they had an inkling that it was a gentleman named Damien Eccles. And police officers James Sudbury and Steve Jones agreed and said that he was a suspect because he had been interested in occultism, and Jones felt that Eccles was capable of murdering children. So immediate kind of not even circumstantial evidence, just like they live in a place, they think it's culty, what they're looking at, because there's naked children that have been murdered, clearly. And they go
tied up in a weird manner, and
they've been tied up in a weird manner. And they said, well, this mentally ill kid with long hair who doesn't like that Arkansas is part of the Bible Belt, he seems like he may have done it. And it seems like from the very beginning that they had two other suspects that they essentially just stopped pursuing. But from the very beginning, they had decided that it was very likely these troublemakers, specifically Damien Eccles and his friend.
Right. Damien Eccles had some run-ins previously, not like very serious ones, but he was deemed to be, he was on full disability for mental illness. To me, it sounds like he had some bipolar, could have been schizophrenia. You know, he had some weird stuff going on. Like there was one point where he claimed that he had obtained superpowers by drinking human blood, you know, just a lot of kind of out there things that he would say. And so, you know, they've decided this is a cult. And that's what they say.
A psychologist said that, which I'm still confused about. So once you are the suspect of a crime, your psychologist is then allowed to say what you said during therapy. So they can't report it before, but then once you are suspected of a crime, that can be used as evidence against you.
No, I think it might have been the defense attorney that was giving that as, you know, hey, he's mentally ill. You can't really believe these things he says. Okay, so this all happened. This all happened on May 5th. Okay, on May 6th, so it's the next day. The boys have not even been found yet. Okay, a woman named Vicki Hutchinson is at the police department. Her job thinks that she may have stolen some money, and they're making her take a polygraph test. And during the polygraph test, her son Aaron, who is in the same class as these other boys, says something. He says, "Oh, those boys were killed at the playhouse," and this playhouse was allegedly in the area where they did end up being found. But as soon as that was said, and because she failed her polygraph test, presumably because her 8-year-old son was in the room and that was quite distracting, and he was saying weird stuff, they started saying, "Oh, really?" So they started. It sounds like she knew Jesse Miskelly, and they had her and Miskelly kind of get together and try to trick Damien Eccles, right? They have a recording device in her house, and they're trying to get him to say something incriminating, and he doesn't say anything incriminating. The police later say, "Oh, this recording was unedible." She says, "No, it wasn't." But she was basically forced in her mind, or coerced in her mind, to testify, that she heard all of these conversations that did not happen. And then later she had attended a Wiccan meeting with Eccles and Miskelly, and part of the allegations were that when Eccles was drunk, he begged about killing these children. But she didn't know where this Wiccan meeting was. She couldn't remember anybody else who was at the Wiccan meeting. Like, did she ever go to a Wiccan meeting? No. But because she was afraid of being prosecuted for stealing from her job and possibly losing her child to CPS, she did what she was told. She played her part.
Yep. Yeah, a pretty classic tactic was employed here, or at least she says was employed here, which is that when somebody is thought to have committed a crime and they're attempting to get information out of that person, they will threaten taking the kid away. And there's no responsibility of the police to actually tell you they don't have the power to do that. They can just threaten you. And if you don't ask for a lawyer, then you won't know, because you don't play this game.
Absolutely.
So ask for a lawyer, everyone. But yes,
and also at this point, polygraph. Never take a polygraph test. That's the other thing you should never do, because they're just going to make up whatever answer they want.
This whole story is covered in polygraph tests, and it's just the worst kind of evidence. And even the Wikipedia for this page, everyone's like, and they failed a polygraph test. What the fuck does that mean? Yes. So the Vicky Hutchinson testimony was interesting. Aaron, her son, also said he witnessed the murders by Satanists who spoke Spanish, which is
I forgot that part.
which is interesting. And that this kid said that they're Satanists is just, I don't know, interesting. I can't even imagine a child trying to pronounce Satanists. There was no playhouse at the location that Aaron indicated, which is a big piece of contention, is that they say that it was near where Aaron said, but the testimony was inconsistent, and they said near a playhouse. There was no playhouse, so it's kind of strange. There are some concerns that I think will be brought up at a later point when I talk about testimony against another person who now is among the two. If you don't believe it was these three kids that did it, then there are two major people that think did, and there's some testimony against one that makes me worry about this whole playhouse thing. Yes, that inaudible. I'm just going through my notes here, and that Miss Kelly was involved with.
It seems like it. I don't understand how they got together. That part was very confusing.
To introduce them. I see.
Okay.
Yes, Miss Kelly was the one of the three. So here, I'll just briefly go through who the three were. The three who were eventually arrested and prosecuted for the crime were Jesse Miss Kelly, who was 17 at the time, Jason Baldwin, who was 16 at the time, and Damien Eccles, who was 18. Baldwin and Eccles were friends or best friends, depending on what you read. And like my mom mentioned, they had been previously arrested for vandalism and shoplifting, respectively. There was one case in which Eccles, it was raining, and Eccles broke into a trailer to get away from the rain and was arrested for it
with his girlfriend,
like an empty trailer.
I think so, with his girlfriend. But she didn't get arrested, just him. Yeah.
She didn't get arrested, just him. But yeah, that had a reputation for their criminal records. Miss Kelly had a reputation for a temper and fist fights. And then I think that Ashley mentioned Miss Kelly was the individual that had near fully mentally handicapped status IQ. So he had an IQ of 72, which is a very specific name for what that is considered. But between 70 and 75, IQ is considered like near intellectual ability, but it is still operating at a very low level. And considering that, in addition to that, he was 17, it's just there's a lot of things that indicate he could probably be taken advantage of by police in this situation. Those were the three that were arrested.
Yes.
And they also had a reputation for being kind of against the culture, especially Eccles, who resented Arkansas and the Bible Belt. Eccles was also from a very poor family, and then yes, there's the mental illness stuff. So his serious mental illness was characterized by grandiose and persecutory delusions, auditory and visual hallucinations, disordered thought processes, substantial lack of insight, and chronic incapacitating mood swings, which I find very interesting, given at this point, and this is the reason that we're even talking about this, I had never heard of the West Memphis Three ever before. And I was actually a fan of a Netflix show called Midnight Gospel, which is this show where they convert a podcast into this cartoon visual narrative thing. It's a great show. I recommend you see it. The third episode of it, Damian Eccles, who ends up getting prosecuted and put on death row for these murders, is on the podcast, and they never mention that he's one of the West Memphis Three. So I had watched this, and I was a fan of that episode before I even knew he was one of the West Memphis Three, and it just it came up on my For You page on TikTok, and one of the top comments was, we shouldn't be enjoying this considering what he did. And I was like, whoa, all right, time to look it up, and went down this whole rabbit hole. But one thing that was interesting, I mean, he's clearly interested in magic and meditation and the relationship between ceremonial magic and meditation. But he did feel lucid during that, and he's written best-selling books that feel lucid. And it's just like, I can't imagine mental illness getting wildly better in prison. But I guess, I don't know, maybe he just meditated so much.
I don't think it did. I don't think it did, at least in the beginning. I think there was a point where in that midnight thing, he talked about, how in prison he did kind of find, it wasn't Buddhism. I can't remember what he was talking about, but he was talking about learning how to meditate and getting to another level and all of that stuff. So he really did embrace a certain level of spirituality in prison. It was what?
Again?
I think it was transcendentalism.
Oh, that might be what it was.
Yeah, that's for meditation to evolve your feelings and soul. Yada yada yada.
Yeah, he was definitely into that stuff and into and magic and all kinds of things. But I think at the beginning of prison was hard, and I think he got better throughout it. But I mean, he still definitely has some fringe thinking where I could see where it would make people uncomfortable, sometimes.
Yeah, that's the first question for me in all of this is, was he really mentally ill, or was he just so into alternative thinking that people from West Memphis would take it as mental illness? Like a little bit of a Salem witch situation where it's just like, well, you're not an evangelical Christian and you believe in Eastern healing and Eastern meditation and whatnot, therefore you're crazy? Or was he crazy? I don't know. But crazy was not the vibe that I got listening to that podcast or watching that show. I've read his writing.
Enlightened.
Feels lucid. He's into alternative, things, but I wouldn't call that, I certainly wouldn't call it more crazy than being Christian. And I would probably call it less crazy than being Christian, because I think that meditation has more to it than Christianity. But yeah, this was all very interesting. They ended up being prosecuted, And especially so, Miss Kelly and then Eccles and I forgot, and Baldwin were separated in their prosecutions. Miss Kelly's the defense focused largely upon the police intimidation and poor police practices when handling someone of a low IQ and when handling a minor, and how they extracted a false confession from him. Whereas there was the defense of Eccles and Baldwin was, the prosecution was entirely focused on this Satanist angle and painting them as two, satanic worshipers who sacrificed children for their own evil needs. It's one of the craziest things. There are clips from the testimony and from the prosecution where you're like, this can't possibly be admissible evidence. It's nuts. But
the reality is there real evidence against them? Anything? It's difficult because so many people have recanted, but there's nothing. Is there?
There is no physical evidence. It is all statements that, the Miss Kelly confession, which I've struggled to find the confession itself, is one of the most damning elements, because, a confession from a participant is a pretty huge piece of evidence, and all the prosecution needs to do is find a way to say that the fact that he has a low IQ is not admissible to evidence for the trial. But so that was a huge element. They characterized the background of Eccles as somebody that people thought could do this, and so it lined up. Ellie says, one of my grandkids is autistic, and he's really smart, but tests at a lower IQ. I could see him get confused in an interrogation. I think some of the techniques used should be illegal. Elliot, you and I certainly agree on that one. And this was a 12-hour interrogation that they had a 16-year-old with a low IQ alone in. And of those 12 hours, they only recorded 47 minutes, which makes you think maybe, just maybe, they were selectively recording because some of it would not help their case, which admittedly it says the Miranda rights, that's the police's job. They're not trying to help your case. So,
but they were clearly feeding it to him. So they would ask him, so what time did you meet up with the boys? What time did you capture them? Whatever. And he would be around noon, but the boys were still in school at noon. Right. So they knew that his information was incorrect. And so then they would say, do you mean after school? Sometime after school, and it would be like, sure, after school. And that was the thing, is that, I think he had one of those personalities where he's trying to get out of the situation, but thinking long term. He's thinking, let me get out of the situation right now. And right now I need to say what they want me to say. So he would confess repeatedly. He would recant it, confess again. He would recant, he would confess again. So he was, and they weren't consistent. They didn't make sense with each other. And the police would rationalize that, saying, sometimes a criminal will, what's the word? They'll undersell what they actually did, right? They'll say they did less because they don't want to admit to the horrible thing that they did. But we don't view that as necessarily an inconsistency. We know they're going to do that. So that's how they would rationalize every time he didn't get something exactly right.
Depressing.
Depressing.
Yeah. So a lot of the prosecution rested on that. It also rested on Eccles in one of the interrogations said something about the mutilation of one of the three children's penis. And they took that as incriminating because they didn't consider it public knowledge at the time. And there's a lot of controversy around that because Eccles was like, I only know what is being shared in gossip around the city, what's on TV, what's in the news. But also his juvenile probation officer discovered the bodies and so may have told him. And so there's just a lot of question about what he could or could not have known. But this was considered in the trial was like, oh, he knew this thing. We didn't tell him. It's like a classic, like, I didn't tell you they drowned thing, which was, I don't know, kind of silly considering how many people saw the bodies. So they do end up getting.
It wouldn't be a big leap, huh?
It would not. Yeah, they do end up getting prosecuted. Eccles gets the death sentence.
Because he's an adult, he gets the death penalty.
Yeah, Baldwin. Well, and because he was accused of being the one that actually killed them, and the other ones were assailants to the whole thing. The other two get life sentences. One with an extra 20 years and one with an extra 40 years. And almost immediately, these three, especially Eccles and Baldwin, because they were a little bit estranged from Miss Kelly, begin going through the process of attempting to appeal with new evidence or showing that evidence was mishandled or that they didn't follow leads. I mean, one of the first things in the case of a child murder is to investigate the families of the three children. And there were several members of families that were not even questioned or that faded into obscurity, some with criminal records that were not, not so kind, which is another thing, is that you just look for somebody with a criminal history in this background. The father or the stepfather of one of the children's, Terry Hobbs, was
Stevie Branch's stepdad.
Yes. Terry Hobbs was never questioned, just faded into obscurity behind this whole thing, but had all sorts of interesting backgrounds. So we'll get into that in a second. But over the course of many years, they attempted to appeal this. And then in 2007, new DNA technology that was not hyper-specific, but is able to eliminate DNA candidates, found that a hair that was in the bindings that did not belong to any of the three children also did not belong to any of the West Memphis Three. And this ends up being a major element of the entire of what eventually gets the West Memphis Three acquitted, or not acquitted actually. Yeah, no, they ended up getting off on an plea bargain. The Alford plea, yes. But this ends up being what makes that possible, is that it is not only not the hair of one of these three of the West Memphis Three, but it is not inconsistent with Terry Wayne Hobbs, which doesn't mean it is Terry Wayne Hobbs's hair, but it's certainly not good. And even since that Alford plea got put out, Damian Eccles and Baldwin have both been trying to get more advanced DNA testing on that hair, because it is possible now to actually sequence that hair. DNA technology has gotten a lot better. And so instead of just eliminating people, you could determine if it was a match with Terry Hobbs, which would do a lot more to exonerate them on the public stage. And they, very interestingly, are going very hard at trying to get all these DNA samples tested, because it seems like they're pretty certain that they were not involved. Whereas Terry Hobbs, despite the fact that he says over and over again that he just wants to know who did it, and he's also quite certain that it was the West Memphis Three, has been pretty vocal about not testing that hair, which is suspect. If you really want all that information to come out, I would recommend you try and get it tested. One other major element is that there were two individuals who came forward even before, or that came forward as having information about the murders before the West Memphis Three were arrested and prosecuted, saying that they had testimony that would show who killed them, and ended up leading to Terry Hobbs being the individual. I don't have it up now.
Yep, his ex-wife also at this point thinks it was him. There was fights with her family, and her brother came to help her one day when they got into a tussle, and Terry Hobbs shot him. So, like, everybody And Stevie Branch's family believes that his stepdad, Terry Hobbs, was the one that did this, which is kind of messed up. But it all, is it telling? I don't know. It feels telling. There's a lot of weird stuff, man, around that guy.
Oh.
But also, we could back up a little further and question whether all of this that we thought happened really happened, right? There was a lot of stuff that they are saying, oh, there's lacerations, there's all of this stuff, there's ritual mutilation. But is that what happened, or was it animal predation, right? Did animals do this to the kids? They didn't die from lacerations. They all died from, it looked like head trauma mostly, and drowning. So, and there's even talk about a bite on one of their foreheads. And even that, it's like, we can't even tell you that that's a bite. And in trial, that was never brought up. It was never said that there was a bite on his forehead. Later on, a medical examiner later on said, ooh, that looks like a bite. But like, it's not even the right size for a human adult. So all of these little things that make it seem like
West Memphis 3.
It didn't. No, it definitely did not.
Yep.
But there was also, there's one point. So Mark Byers, who is one of he's the stepdad of the one whose name's Byers, Chris Byers. He was one that was very vocal in the media, and I think the media definitely played a part in leaking information and kind of pushing this satanic occultist narrative, because they would leak information, and they would get this information from the police, presumably. But they said things like Damien Eccles had children's genitals in jars under his bed and stuff like that. And you would see Mark Byers on TV just shouting about, these are facts. How can you dispute this? We know this is the one that did it, So it was a hot mess, man.
Depressing. I would like to just briefly read a signed affidavit from one of those gentlemen that came forward with information. It is interesting. This also incorporates a person with very low IQ, and I'm just like, what's going on in Arkansas here? But it seems like there's a lot of that element in it. Hookworms. So here, let me just share this right here. This is a signed affidavit by Billy Wayne Stewart. I'm just going to read through it. I'm not going to read all 132 pages, but these 8 pages cover exactly what I'm talking about. And this is information he came forward with that just got dismissed because they thought they had the right people with Damien Eccles. So this is all about Terry
the
Hobbs.
narrative.
Yep. Mm-hmm. It says, I first met Terry Hobbs in late 1990 or early 1991. I met him through Roy Taylor. Roy Taylor was the marijuana, cocaine, and crystal meth supplier for Hobbs and me. Mr. Hobbs lived in West Memphis. Roy Taylor lived approximately 20 miles from Mr. Hobbs. Later, Mr. Hobbs started buying directly from me to supplement his supply from Mr. Taylor. The amounts purchased from me by Hobbs were always very small. Mr. Hobbs typically purchased from me at least a couple times per month from late 1991 through May 1993. So that's 4 months after the murders. I learned from Roy Taylor that Mr. Hobbs was bisexual. This is going to be an element. It's going to be an interesting element. I learned through my connection in the drug trade that Mr. Hobbs preferred sex with young boys. Mr. Hobbs repeatedly invited my son, Bill, who was 10 years old at the time, to pool parties at his house. I always declined these offers based upon the information that I had learned. On May 5th, 1993, Mr. Hobbs arrived at my home. At the time Mr. Hobbs arrived at my home, I was standing at the front of my stock car working on the engine. Also at this time, Benny Guy was lying underneath my stock car working on it from below. I looked over the top of my stock car and saw Mr. Hobbs in his pickup truck with a man. Mr. Hobbs was kissing the man. Mr. Hobbs was also with Buddy Lucas and L.G. Hollingsworth. I would say most importantly, remember the name Buddy Lucas in this, who were exiting the vehicle. Buddy and LG were teenagers who also lived in Lakeshore Trailer Park. Buddy and LG purchased marijuana from me. I believe that the money for the purchase came from Mr. Hobbs. I was puzzled that Mr. Hobbs did not make the purchase himself. Buddy and LG returned to Mr. Hobbs's truck and sat in the cab between Mr. Hobbs and the other man, and the four left together. For some reason, after May 5th, 1993, Mr. Hobbs no longer wanted to come to my home to make his purchases. Within a couple of weeks of May 5th, 1993, Mr. Hobbs contacted me and asked me to deliver marijuana to his home. Give me 1 second. I need to make sure of something. Um, sorry. Okay, so I'm sorry, but for some reason I had January in my head. This is the day of the crime
Yes.
that he's talking about, May 5th, 1993. I said 4 months after. That was just incorrect. I had January 5th in my head for some reason. Within a couple of weeks, Mr. Hobbs contacted me and asked me to deliver marijuana to his home, which was highly unusual and was unlike any of our other deals. I delivered the marijuana with my son. Immediately prior to said delivery, my son noticed and pointed out to me that Mr. Hobbs was kissing a man. This was the same man whom I had seen Mr. Hobbs kissing on May 5th, 1993. Within a week of that delivery, I also delivered marijuana, cocaine, and crystal meth to Mr. Hobbs in Memphis, Tennessee, on Madison Avenue at a gay bar called J-Wags. Upon the delivery, I saw Mr. Hobbs holding hands with the same man who he was at my house with on May 5th, 1993. All right. So, in January or February of 1994, so this is 7 months later, Roy Taylor asked if I had seen Mr. Hobbs recently. I asked Roy why he was asking me. Roy told me that Mr. Hobbs was one of the people who murdered the 3 boys on May 5th, 1993, and that one of the boys was Mr. Hobbs' stepson. Roy also told me that there were 3 other guys with Mr. Hobbs when it happened. I asked Roy how he knew this. Roy responded that Mr. Hobbs had told him. Roy further told me that the 3 boys had caught the 4 men doing something in the Blue Beacon Wood that was going to cause trouble between Mr. Hobbs and his wife. And then the conversation with Buddy Lucas. I often allowed Buddy Lucas, whom I called Lil Bud, to hang around and work on my race car because I felt bad for him. Lil Bud was obviously slow, couldn't speak too good, and had trouble making friends. Buddy also often came to my home and used his BB gun to shoot terrapin turtles in the lake behind my home, Arkansas. Sometime during the week prior to Mother's Day, Buddy came to my home with his BB gun. Buddy carried his BB gun behind my home to the lake. A few minutes later, Buddy came back to my home. He was barefooted and didn't have his BB gun. I wondered why he was barefooted, especially because there were many sharp metal pieces around my yard from building my stock car. I asked Buddy why he did not have his shoes on and where his gun was. Buddy responded, I threw them in the lake. I ain't killing turtles no more, and I ain't wearing those big-ass shoes. I could tell something was bothering Buddy. I asked, what's wrong, little bud? Do you need some money to get something for Mother's Day? Buddy shrugged and said, I ain't even worried about Mother's Day just now. A couple weeks later, Buddy was supposed to meet me at my home to go to the biggest stock car race of the year. That was the first time that year that Buddy had not shown up early to go to the races with me. I went to Mary Uchi Wells' trailer. This goes on for a hot second. I'm trying to get to the good part, but it is all context for the accusation. In April 1995, Benny Guy told me that Buddy Lucas had confessed involvement in the murders at Blue Beacon Woods. Benny asked me what he should do. I asked Buddy to come over and help on my stock car. When Buddy got there, I said, Lil Bud, I need to talk with you. Buddy's appearance changed immediately. He looked worried and said, well, what do you want to talk about, Gooch? Gooch was the nickname a lot of people called me. I said about something Benny told me. Buddy turned pale and got a very still look on his face. Buddy asked me, you remember that day me and LG came over? I told Buddy, yeah, I know. I don't like LG coming around. Buddy then asked, when we got that $20 a weed? I asked, yeah, I remember all my deals. Buddy then said, well, them guys in the truck, that was Terry Hobbs and David Jacoby. David Jacoby, importantly, is somebody that Terry Hobbs's wife, once Terry Hobbs's wife decided that she thinks that Terry Hobbs did it, mentioned that he might have done it with David Jacoby. And Terry Hobbs's wife testifies that David Jacoby's hair was also found at the scene. There's some muddiness with that whole thing. But I do think it kind of
he can't be excluded.
Say again?
He can't be excluded the same way that Terry Hobbs can't. Neither can Jacoby.
Yes. So those two cannot be excluded. And I would love if they just tested the fucking hair. I said, I know that. I know Terry Hobbs. Buddy then told me that he and LG had been walking in the trailer park, and Terry Hobbs and David Jacoby pulled up next to them, and Mr. Hobbs yelled, hey, boys, what y'all doing? Buddy told me that he and LG shrugged their shoulders and said nothing. Mr. Hobbs then asked, you boys know where we can find some weed? Buddy answered, Billy Stewart sells weed. Buddy and LG then got into Mr. Hobbs's truck and drove around the corner to my home. Buddy told me that after purchasing the marijuana from me, the four of them drove around Marion and West Memphis neighborhoods, smoking marijuana and drinking whiskey. They finally got to the South Service Road of Interstate 55 in West Memphis, Arkansas. From the South Service Road, they turned south onto the dirt road on the east side of the Blue Beacon Wood. At that time, the Blue Beacon Truck Wash was on the west side of Blue Beacon Wood, just in case anyone is wondering where the truck wash was. Buddy told me that once they arrived at the Blue Beacon Wood, Mr. Hobbs wanted Buddy and LG to wrestle and pointed and then said to Buddy, "You and dude there wrestle," referring to LG as dude. Buddy said that he and LG began wrestling with each other while Mr. Hobbs and Mr. Jacoby watched. Buddy smiled when he told me that he had hooped old LG in their wrestling match. Then Mr. Hobbs and Mr. Jacoby offered more marijuana and whiskey to Buddy and LG, which Buddy and LG accepted. When describing the smoking and drinking, Buddy dropped his eyes and paused as if he was ashamed. He would no longer make eye contact. Buddy would not have been ashamed discussing marijuana or whiskey, which led me to understand that there was more going on between the boys and the men than what Buddy had just told me. At this point, Buddy's speech slowed. Gone was the little Bud that I had grown to know and love. At the time that Buddy said the four of them were just smoking and drinking, Mr. Hobbs saw 3 boys on 2 bicycles spying on them. Mr. Hobbs screamed, "Get them, little fuckers." Buddy and LG caught 2 of the children. Buddy told me that Mr. Jacoby, in his desperation to catch the children, tripped on his own feet and skinned his knee. I understood that Mr. Jacoby's knee must have been bare in order for Buddy to see the injury. After he jumped from the fall, Mr. Jacoby immediately caught and furiously beat the 3rd child. Buddy told me that this scared him so bad that he did not know what to do. Mr. Hobbs then approached and pulled a knife. As Buddy was telling this part of the story, he slumped over and his hands and shoulders began to shake uncontrollably. I saw in Buddy's eyes the terror that he had to have felt in those woods. At that point in the conversation, Buddy paused for a long time. To break the silence, I finally asked, "Lil Bud, you all right?" Buddy answered, "Yeah, Gooch." And I asked, "What happened next, Lil Bud? Did you kill them boys?" Buddy waited and then said that Mr. Hobbs made Buddy and LG pull the pants off the boys. Mr. Hobbs walked over to the boy that Mr. Jacoby had been beating and repeatedly bit the boy's penis and scrotum. Buddy told me that when he saw Mr. Hobbs biting and cutting the boy, he was afraid that Mr. Hobbs would do the same to him. Then Mr. Hobbs cut the boy's genitals. Mr. Hobbs said that the other two children had to die because of what all they had seen. At that moment in the conversation, I began to get really sad because everyone knew that Buddy himself only had the mind of a child. Buddy did not tell me who killed which child or how, other than that Mr. Hobbs bit and cut the penis and scrotum of one of the boys. Buddy told me that he and LG were forced to hold the children while Mr. Hobbs and Mr. Jacoby killed them. Mr. Jacoby beat one of the boys until the boy was quiet and his body fell limp. Buddy believed the boy was dead. Next, Buddy told me that they tied the boys up. He did not say that what they tied him up with or who did the tying. Then I asked him, "Well, Bud, what did you do with the boys?" Buddy answered that Mr. Hobbs said, "We've got to get rid of this. They can't be found, at least not yet." Then Buddy said all 4 of them took the 3 boys and threw them and their clothes in the water and threw their bicycles in the bayou. Buddy told me that Mr. Hobbs demanded that Buddy, LG, and Mr. Jacoby go back to the truck and that Mr. Hobbs followed them. And this is essentially the context of that conversation and that testimony.
I had not heard that. That's a terrible story. It's definitely more believable. I don't understand why Terry Hobbs would cut the one boy's genitals, though. That doesn't make any sense to me.
It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And if I'm going with a cynic's brain, it does sound a little bit like elements of the story have been filled in by the wider news story and stuff. And if we are going off the fact that this person has the mind of a child and they likely have looked back on this experience multiple times, your memory can be convoluted by re-remembering something traumatic like that. And so I do think that there's probably elements of the story that are different. I think there's also a possibility that this story is a fabrication as well. But the fact that hair is not inconsistent with Terry Hobbs and with Jacoby, and that they actively do not want the hair tested, to me it puts this whole thing in a very different light. And the fact that that Damien Eccles does want it tested. I mean,
he does. Even now, like in January of this year,
come out, tend to be confident that the evidence will be good for them. That seems like that's true. And the fact that, I mean, the West Memphis Police Department was destroying evidence and indicating that some evidence was less effective than it actually was, and they were only recording parts of conversations, and then the evidence that they did collect, they were improperly storing. It all reeks to me of collusion and whatnot. And the fact that they didn't interview Terry Hobbs, who has a criminal record and who is the stepfather to one of the children, either shows I'm not going to go so far as to show conspiracy, but it just shows the ineptitude of this police force, and the fact that they just showed up and they're like, we know who this is, with no evidence.
Right.
Just what the fuck, dude? I don't know.
It's a lot of what the fuck. Should we talk about why we have Vinny here with us today?
Yep. We have him here just to sit at the bottom of the screen and have some. So I think something that's important to the context of this whole situation is how Satanism and, alternate religions were viewed, and just how young people with their long hair were viewed. And so I want to talk a little bit about that, because I have been thinking about the satanic panic and moral panic in the 90s and what it felt like to live and be young in that era. Obviously, I don't understand that. And so I thought I would bring on my Uncle Vinny, who's, a veteran of having long hair and being counterculture in the 90s. And so I thought that it would be good to have him on. I just want to know more about kind of what it felt like to be in that era. Did it feel like there was a moral panic going on? Were you aware of the fact that this was like one of the big elements of the era? Or is it something that gets recontextualized when you look back on the era? And so I just kind of want to talk about that.
Well, it depends on largely like where you're from too, because where we are from, Rochester, pretty liberal in our artsy town. So there's like quite a few guys with long hair going around. There's a lot of churches and stuff too, but I will say like in high school, I mean, I've had long hair ever since I've had hair. Even as like a little kid, my parents always kept it fairly long. But now I will say that. And I never really experienced like too much of the whole thing from the satanic panic. I mean, I had like girlfriend's parents look at me and see the long hair, that kind of thing. Like immediately, I mean, like that, not like just because he's got long hair and he's some kind of drug user, he's some kind of like he's a bum or whatever.
He's a punk. He's
like,
no
punk.
good.
Well, which I wasn't a punk. I was a metalhead.
Wait, but like the other kind of punk, like you're a punk. That kid's a punk.
Right. And the funny thing, well, I obviously, I've always hung out with like a lot of musicians and that kind of thing, like a lot of other people with long hair. And I've always been in like a big part of the whole thing that people think about people with long hair. And it's a lot of it's true for some parties, like they're all druggies and they're all this kind of thing. And I've always been pretty straight edge most of my life. And I mean, all my other friends, they're potheads and this and that. And but also on top of that, I have ADHD, so I've always been very high energy, very very convoluted, very spacey. So everyone just naturally thought that I was on some drugs, or whatever. I was the only one who wasn't. So and I kind of got a kick out of that. So I mean, and I've always kind of like been about pushing buttons. So I kind of like reveled in a lot of it. But one thing I didn't like was like in order to get a job, you'd have to get your hair cut, and that's changed some since then, which is nice. But back then, I mean, and I hated it because it seems like a silly thing, but the long hair was always part of my personality. It's always part of my identity. And I did the short hair thing for probably 10 years, and I never felt right. And so but if you had the fact, okay, I was I wore the uniform of a metalhead. I have quite a few stories about some of my exploits at some of these different shows and stuff. That people would look back and what was wrong with something wrong with me? It wasn't the case. It's just I was just a young guy who just preferred to have long hair, listen to heavy metal, and that's what most people were like. But it's a transitory period in time too, though. I mean, because you have a lot of different cultures coming through, and you still have very staunch conservative people who thought, if it's not in this little box, then it's evil. If it's not in the Bible, it's evil. If it's not this. So it's weird, and it's kind of hard for me to talk about just things out from nowhere because because there is so much. So if you were to have a specific question, we could talk about that. But there is a lot. So if you have a specific question, please go ahead and ask, and we can talk about it. But as far as just out with it, there's a lot that happened. I knew some guys who were Satanists, and it wasn't what people thought it was. It still isn't.
So what was it?
What did they think it was, or what is it?
Both.
What did they think it was?
Well, they thought it was people kidnapping other people and sacrificing them to the devil and casting spells and this and that, and there was never that. You probably had some people some sick people who were out there doing it, but it was never for any religious purposes. There are genuinely disturbed people in this world that it isn't that they don't have any value for human life, but it's but they certainly have different ideas of what people are for, if that makes sense.
And what is Satanism really? The ones that were really Satanists, they weren't like that. What were they really?
All they were really it was just it was a form of a rebellion. It was almost what's called a parody religion, where and it was mainly focused on Catholicism because that's the big Christian denomination still. But they'd have the crucifix up on their wall. Satanists would just invert it. You have a Catholic mass where everything was supposed to be very pompous and pious, and Satanists would just turn that around and make a joke out of it. They'd have the naked people dancing around or the simulated sex, and it's really more or less whatever they want to do. I'm going to do the opposite. It's kind of almost kind of like the equivalent of trying to own the libs. Just doing this stupid stuff.
The lips. But you just said owning the lips. No, but it's funny because they were just doing whatever the opposite is. Let's just go do that because we think
exactly. And that's really like modern day Satanism too. There is actually like 12, maybe 12, maybe more rules. Where self gratification is number one. Make yourself happy. Don't worry about anyone else. Think about yourself. Don't think about anyone else. There is always the thing behind Christianity that we're supposed to be thinking about others over ourselves. Satanism did the opposite. Think about yourself over others. Their aesthetics are very important. So that's why you tend to see a lot of Satanists who are very attractive because they're very about aesthetics.
Are you attracted to Satanists? Is that what you're saying? Did you find Satanists attractive?
I've always been attracted to heavily pierced and tattooed women who wear black. Black. I'm not gonna lie about that. You've seen some of my photographs. But So Satanism itself is a parody religion. So it's there to make fun of Christianity.
Yep.
Yeah. I also will say, I think during this time period that you actually identified as a Wiccan at the time, and
never really a Wiccan. More of a pagan, which is more like an umbrella term. Yeah, because Wiccan is very specific, and there's a lot of well, okay, I kind of have to say, I think it was W.C. Fields who said that I would never be a member of a group who would have me as a member. So I've never been a big joiner. So so there's anyone who like identifies something. I guess if it made sense, I guess I could like ascribe to like certain aspects of it, but like there's something like just ridiculous, things that surround so many different things, whether it's Wiccanism or whether it's even like philosophy or even Christianity. There's like so many ridiculous things that surround like the core things that it almost corrupts the core tenets. So like I just can't get into that part. So like I will identify with certain aspects of things, but I've never really identified as one thing in particular.
Did you ever feel judged for that stuff, though? Do you ever feel like, man, you were a bad guy, you're evil? Did people call you evil at all for some of your beliefs?
Yeah, many times. Well, it wasn't. Well, now I've had like girlfriend's parents who immediately like, okay, he's evil. I don't want him anywhere near my daughter. Yeah, I don't want him anywhere near my house for no other reason than what I look like, or the fact that I've never been a yes ma'am, yes sir kind of person. I've never been, disrespectful, but I've just never been, just never been like super nice. I've always been very natural people, very respectful, but I've just been very honest with people. I don't really mince words that often, but like I said, never disrespectful. Now there were people like when they found out that I wasn't Christian that, oh, he's naturally going to hell. I mean, do you want to go to hell? Yeah, my normal response is, if I believed in it, I'd meet you there. But now the other thing I like to tell people is, there is a lot of spiritual thought that says that we're already in hell trying to claw our way out. And
feels
so
true.
If I believed in it, then that's probably what I'd be more likely to think about. It's like, we're already there, just trying to claw our way out. Have to deal with people like you. I believe that that kind of thing, and actually might be more valid than most. But no, I mean, So I identified as pagan for a while, just because, like I said, it's an umbrella term, but there's no set thing to it. I mean, you have different aspects of it, different sides, different kinds of Wiccanism, different kinds of Puritanism, yada yada. But I've never
it's like Christianity. There is no hell. This is hell.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, there's, for all we know, this could be a prison planet. I mean, we don't know.
We don't know.
Exactly.
Let's see. I will say, if you go back to Satanic Panic and kind of what it felt like in the 80s, even before this case, there was the McPriest, right? Where these kids just kept creating more elaborate stories about cults and about, sex cults operating out of daycare centers and stuff. And the entire country was losing its mind. Our mom was losing her mind. She was like, right, are you okay? Is everything all right?
Well, it's the same thing nowadays with pizza places and human trafficking.
Yep, it's like that.
Basically, say Satanic Panic is human trafficking out of pizza parlors. So I mean, it's just they just replaced one thing with another. And before that, there was something else. Yeah, and then way back when there was the Salem witch trials, and there was things that happened before that. I mean, it's people are just generally fearful creatures. Now, and if you tweet, if you push the right buttons in some people, you can get them to do just about anything you want. They'll go off half cocked and lose control of their faculties.
Oh, that sounds like the ad from when we started the show.
Yeah, exactly, and that's exactly right. It's an accurate idea.
Yep. QAnon is doing their job right now. Yeah, QAnon is trying to keep Satanic Panic alive right now, or bring it back.
Right.
As you were talking about, pizza parlors and
scared people are controllable people.
Scared people are controllable people, and I think that's what's important to understand is who is benefiting from having you scared. And back in the 90s, this stuff, the idea of Satanic Panic and cults and all this stuff, it was talked about talk shows, religious conferences, mental health experts were trying to, find your repressed memories. The police, obviously, look at how quick the police jumped on it with this one. They jumped on it right away, and the news was happy to report it all, right?
Yep.
They're not too picky. They're like, this is what the police are telling me. This is the thing you should be worried about right now.
Well, at the same time, that's also Arkansas, though, and in the Bible Belt. And we live in the Bible Belt, and there's the coast is a little bit different, granted, but you get farther north, and I mean, they're all about religion, this and the fight between good and evil, and the devil's out to take your soul, and which to me,
oh my gosh.
If I were a Christian, I'd be insulted by that because they don't think very highly of God, now do they?
Let's look at Ellie's comment here.
All right.
In 1991.
Oh boy. In 1991, I was seeing a psychologist who wanted to know if my dreams, I saw candles and things in my dreams hinting at maybe having repressed satanic abuse. It was wild in that period of time. So it's all crazy. Well, and one reason I'm thinking about it, and I'm thinking about this fear and how people just I don't know, how willing people are to just delve into it now, is that it's interesting. A lot of the fear was against the counterculture now. I do feel like we have a society that's more willing to accept the quote counterculture at this point. I mean, I think that tattoos have never been more acceptable. I think that, goth lifestyles and punk and long hair have never been more acceptable. And yet I also think that both sides of society are incredibly afraid of each other right now. I mean, the people in the cities are afraid of the people in the middle of America and vice versa. And they hate each other. And everyone's a member of 7 different groups. And it's almost impossible to not be a member of a group. By not being a member of a group, you're a member of a new fucking group. And but the question for me here is that, I mean, I've been politically involved for, 10 years max. Right. And so there's the question is always, I look back at these eras and I look back at the idea of the Satanic Panic and of the Red Scare and of all these different things through history. And I go, is what I'm experiencing actually different? Does it actually feel different to you guys? Or does it feel like a new version of that thing?
No, to me, not at all. The way I've explained it to other people, because I've had this conversation before, is society is like a seesaw. And did they still have seesaws when you were younger, Colin?
Yep.
Okay. So because the playgrounds started getting safer and this kind of thing, but and seesaws hurt. But a seesaw is like it's all about balance. Is at one point you have one person's all the way on top, someone's on the bottom, then you have the next person all the way on top. And at some point, you start to balance each other out. So right now we're still in that period, like where we're just not at that equilibrium, at the equal fulcrum yet. And so that's kind of what's going on. That's what's been going on for decades and centuries. And it's kind of by design, I tend to think, because it goes back to people who are scared of control. If you have things constantly off balance, no one knows what's going on, and they're uncertain. So they will go along with the first really self-assured voice that they can find.
This sounds like some Damien Eccles shit you're spouting. I'm just kidding. He's real whimsical. I'm just saying some of the things you said, I'm like, I bet he felt all of those same things, like I just don't agree just to be agreeable. You could tell when he would talk to the police and with the police that he didn't seem scared, and the police didn't like that. You could tell that he was smart enough to be able to read between the lines, right? And so, it's like, I could figure out what you were getting at because I'm not an idiot, So it was just interesting. Like, I could see you being the same way, that you would have been snarky. You would have been a problem. Yeah. There were quite a few long-haired, like you had a whole little, band of long-haired.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I had an crush.
But I do remember a guy in our town, right, that everybody said was a Satanist, and he was killing people's cats and stuff.
Lou Mosier. Yeah, Lou Mosier.
Was it Lou Mosier?
LU. Yeah.
Okay. But was he really doing those things?
Well, when he was a Satanist, he wasn't doing those things, but he was a Satanist. But he was a Satanist.
But he was a Satanist. Yeah. So he was really a Satan, and then they would ascribe any missing in the town is his fault because he's a Satanist.
Yeah. Well, and it's kind of it's kind of funny because I met him a couple times. I mean, I wasn't in his circles, but I met him a couple times. Super nice guy. A little scary looking. He's a little scary looking, but he was a nice guy. But of course, back then, not knowing quite what I do now because I was only 14 at the time. But someone said, nudge, he's a Satanist. He worships the devil. And at the time, I'm like, that's scary. But that's because he's a Satan worshiper. I was a metalhead, and always this is back when Motley Crue were the big Satanists. It's just funny when you think about it. And it's like I was a big Motley Crue fan, so even then, and they would talk about Lou and that, and I'm like, he was a little frightening at first, but I'd say, like I said, super super nice guy, and
right?
Huh? What?
As you met him and talked to him, it was like, okay.
Exactly. I mean, like I said, he was soft spoken. He was a little snarky himself, but that's kind of like what Satanists are like. That's why they're Satanists in the first place, because they have a little bit of, because they have a lot of that sarcasm and wanting to push people's buttons themselves. Like you said, he's
I was born in 87. I just like to read it in case people are listening in their car. I was born in 87, but my grandma never left Satanic panic and told me I was going to hell for using dice when playing Monopoly. Exaggeration.
Because it's a form of divination. But and like I said, I never really took a lot of that stuff seriously. I mean, there's a little bit, like I said, when I was growing up and just didn't know any better and hadn't really been exposed to too much. And since you talked about our mother, and she's a very scared person, but she was raised like that too, though. I mean, because I don't know if you're aware, but they couldn't go out at night. When night came, all the windows got closed. The mirrors got covered. I mean, she hadn't gone out at night until she was at least 17. Oh no, I'm serious.
I don't know the mirrors. That's weird.
Yeah. Well, it calmed down because you see that's where demons would come through the mirror at night and stuff. According to them, it calmed down quite a bit when we moved in there. But still, I mean, we weren't allowed out at night. Even though they had that nice, the grandparents had that nice porch. I mean, sun went down, doors got locked.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, I just never took a lot of it seriously. Once I started to figure out, oh well, that's what this is. This is once I started actually being able to formulate things for myself, I just never took it seriously, and I still don't.
And I bet that would have probably been the road that Damien Eccles went down had this not all happened to him, right? Somebody else has to take it seriously. You don't have to take it seriously. You can just be saying stuff and experimenting with the world and being a smart ass and think everything's going to be fine. And somebody else makes a decision because, you're the Satanist, maybe not you. Lou Mosier's the Satanist in the town, so it must be him that did X, Y, or Z. So.
Yeah. Well, and I knew quite a few of Lou's friends. And I mean, they were as typical Holly town people. And I mean, they're just, like I said, as nice as could be. Yeah, I mean, there was just nothing to them. And I saw a comment up here earlier saying, "Hey, I'm Christian." And I'm sorry to tell you, I've met many more really nice non-Christians than Christians. I really have. I mean, I've met nice Christians. Don't get me wrong. I'm not downing all of them, but I've met a lot more really nice people who didn't associate with any of that.
Yep.
And it's a weird thing,
but even so, something like this happens, and you've got them telling you that these crimes look cultish because the positions, the way the bodies were, right? This doesn't look normal. This is weird. Anybody, I think anybody would get scared, but we shouldn't jump to conclusions. We should look at the evidence. Certainly check the logical places, and logical isn't just the weird kid that says, snarky stuff.
Yeah.
Well, and you could see if this had happened in Holly, and if they had started asking the kids at your school, that name would have come up, right? Lou would have come up. And that people would be like, well, I heard he killed cats. And that you could see how this could snowball in the direction of this kid. And, it was just their fucking stepdad that did it. He was in Holly. And every city had that person. Even it's the plot of season 4 of Stranger Things that occurs. Is that there's an actual fucking demon monster in the city. And they're like, yeah, but that guy runs a Dungeons and Dragons group. So,
Well, on kind of a related note, this is something I've been thinking about a lot too. So we lived in a town. This is the town that our sister Marlene was born in, called Lyman. It's like just north of Gulfport. I think you're like a year old. I was like 6, and there was like a string of break-ins. People's houses getting broken into on our street, and it's going on for about a month or two, and no one could figure it out. And so the family about 4 houses down from us, they had put bars on the windows and the big cages on the doors and locks and everything, so they wouldn't get broken into. Matter of fact, and they're still there, even 40-some years later. But because like I said, they didn't want to get their house broken into. It turns out that it was their oldest son who was living in that house was the one who was breaking in everybody's house. Yeah, and that's just something that's stuck with me all this time. Is usually the people who are pointing the fingers, are the ones who are usually the ones who, and I do this in my current vocation too. The ones who are pointing the fingers, I look at them just as heavily as I look at the people that they're pointing the fingers at. Because they have those silly little motivational things little memes and stuff that they show at work to for team building, that kind of thing. And one of them is pointing your finger, right? So you're pointing your finger at someone. How many fingers are pointed back at you?
Oh yeah. Sure.
What I'm saying?
I was like, what are you doing? Am I supposed to point my finger at you? No, I got you.
That's because we're it's all looks how I want. Yeah, wonky.
Yeah.
So
all right.
Well, and it goes along with something else too, because it's all the same principle. You get a lot of these politicians and church leaders who are extremely anti-LGBT, and they're
that is the one right now, right?
Well, and that's a recent one, yeah. But the big time television priests and that kind of thing, and it turns out that they've been soliciting young male prostitutes, or they've been for lack of a better term, diddling some of their underlings and that kind of thing. So I think a lot of it too, and this kind of goes along with the Terry Hobbs possibly being the one, trying to deflect attention away from yourself. Yeah. I mean, and that's another reason why I don't take most of this stuff seriously, because they're hiding something. What are they hiding?
Yeah. You have a different vantage point, I think, but from your camera angle.
Well, as far as work goes, but I mean, just in general, though.
This has got to be one of my favorite comments I've ever seen. My adult children are obnoxious, probably because they couldn't watch Mary Poppins. That one, I love that comment. But thank you very much to everybody for jumping on and talking a little bit about the Satanic Panic. As per every episode, the question that you are left with is, can society ever escape the stupidity of humans? And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
But you're not going to like how we get there. And so...
Oh, okay.
I can talk about that too, but yeah.
Should we do a quick thank you to everybody who's here? Thank you, Vinny, of course.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun. It's been interesting.
For sure. Thank you, Ashley, Barbie, Ellie, Scotland. Boy, usually Colin does this. He's much better than me. Paul.
Sorry. Patricia.
Trisha. I didn't see Trisha.
You don't see Patricia?
Oh, okay. I didn't get that far. Marta C, Sarah Z, Patricia. There's Patricia Scotland. I think I got Scotland.
John Yates.
John Yates popped in to say hello. Did I say Ellie? Ellie. Okay.
Is cyberbullying counseling service, is that a name that you said?
That's Paul. That's Paul.
That's Paul. Hey, Paul. To me, you are
Yep, that's
cyberbullying
everybody.
counseling services.
There you go.
Very
Thank you guys all for keeping us company. Shall we sing it out?
Let's sing it out.
She did a short